Hello my friends, it is I Jake, and I am here today to give you a story that you will remember. For any of you who are a fan of Red Dead, my friend, you will enjoy this story more than you think you would. For I have a story today that will bring you chills and give you a lot of anxiety if you think about it pretty good. So, let's begin. Back in the day, 5 years ago, a man named Jake lived in a little house or settlement, whichever one you would like to call it. He lived there with his mother and his dog Jack. Jake had a lot of skill in farming and hunting from his dad teaching him back when he was only 16 years old. His dad sadly passed due to heart failure. But Jake had a lot of skills in farming, so when he and his mother got to home, Jake immediately the next day, after unpacking all of his things, started making a farm. He sooner or later grew corn and wheat. He eventually grew so much food that he had to sell some. The house was just a little walk from the town of Rhodes. So every once in a while, Jake would walk to the Rhodes general store. He would sell the produce for the highest price he could get since he didn't have much money due to his mother buying the house. He would usually get around $10 to $20 for the produce at Rhodes. He eventually made enough money to get his own gun license. He bought a good-looking double-action revolver. It was somewhat worn, but the price was good for what he made. He promised to his mother and dog that he would use this only in case of emergencies and if there were intruders. He kept it right under his bed, right in arm's reach. But from there on out, Jake's life was very peaceful. Continued his life the same mostly every day. He would farm, save up some of the crops to sell, and continue to get enough to make some money from it. He would also go to the saloon and have a drink sometimes, just if his day wasn't fitting him. Also some other miscellaneous things, such as spending money he saved on real canned goods. He would go up to different settlers, asking them if they needed any help with anything. And that's how he ended up making really good money, delivering goods, helping out other farmers, and one key thing later on that would change his life: bounty hunting. About a year later, Jake would go up and talk to the sheriff of Rhodes and ask for a bounty hunting license. The sheriff said, "Sure, but don't die in the process of me giving you this. We've had enough people die from trying to be a bounty hunter, especially at your age." But Jake was ready for the challenge. So after he got his license, he then got given a rifle from one of the officers at Rhodes. They trusted him, for now. A couple months passed, and believe it or not, Jake was one of the best bounty hunters right now in all of the Rhodes County. He wouldn't even harm the bounties. He would just find where they are, take out the men, even though he didn't want to kill anybody. Sometimes he just had to, but he didn't hurt the bounties. Sometimes if he was nice enough, he would try to pledge for some of them to get them out of jail, if they didn't, kill someone. But Jake would continue to take in bounties for about 3 months.
Until one day.
Now this is where the story gets more weirder than you think it does. One day Jake was off to do bounties and wanted to sell some of his crops he had kept going while he was on his other job. He took them into the general store to sell to the store manager. Someone was riding and laughing while on horseback coming down the main road of Rhodes. There was 3 of them. They had animal hides on their backs and didn't have the best looks, also had large beards. One of them entered the general store and was looking around, also glancing at Jake. He then went up to Jake and asked him,
"How much you selling that food for?"
Jake replied saying, "I'm not selling it to you. I'm doing business with him, so if you'll excuse me." That didn't sit well with him. Another one came into the store. The one who talked to Jake signaled to the other to do something. He tried to get the store clerk's attention by making him turn around. While that was happening, the guy tosses his gun in the air, but Jake caught it, but the other guy had another one and shot in the air while falling backwards out the door of the store. The clerk turned around in shock at what he saw. Jake had the gun, the other guy was on the floor, and the other guy was shocked as well, saying, "Did you kill him?" The men rushed out of the store, asking for the law when they came immediately from hearing the gunshot. Jake was then arrested for disturbing the peace as well as shooting a gun in a public store. He got framed and set up. He tried to tell the sheriff about it as best as he could from the story Jake explained without saying any nonsense. he let him go, also being because he is the best bounty hunter they got in the area at the moment. They sent him home with a warning. He then went home to explain this to his mother. She asked him if he got hurt, but Jake was fine. He was more mad than hurt. He wanted to get back at those guys for basically framing him, but he just tried to blow it off and get some rest that night. 2:50 a.m. on a dark night, Jake was awoken from his sleep by the sound of glass breaking and screaming. He grabbed his gun he had under his bed as well as his rifle. He rushed downstairs, but then blackness. Jake was then awoken by a guy who had a knife by his throat. He realized he was knocked out. There was 7 men by his door. One had a knife to his mother's neck, and one had a gun to his dog's head. Jake was asking the men, "What the hell do you want from me?" One of them responded saying,
You disrespected my men yesterday. I don't like that one bit. So this is karma, my friend. Hope you enjoy it while you watch. Oh, by the way, the name's Eddie.
He then orders one of his guys to cut Jake's mother's neck. She was bleeding out on the floor, coughing up blood. Jake was screaming in anger and sadness. The men were laughing their asses off. Then Eddie, the leader of them, got really close to Jake and said,
You won't be needing her anymore. I don't think you'll need your mutt either.
Eddie told his men to take Jake's dog and knock him out again. They did just that. The next morning, Jake awoke with rage and anger on his face. He found a way to get out of the rope they had tied his hands with and ended up freeing himself. He stared down at his mother in straight sadness, saying this was all his fault. He then picked her up and buried her in the back of the house, as well as leaving a note right next to her in the hole he dug, saying, I will get revenge, and I will make them all suffer for what they did to you. A few days pass, and the sheriff from Rhodes had a job for Jake, so he sent 2 officers or lawmen up to his home to see if he would partake in this job. They knock once. They knock twice. No answer. They try around back to see if he's there. No one at all. They investigated the grave in the back and saw it was his mother's. They then went into the house to find nothing but dried blood and glass shards everywhere. They were so in shock and confused on what they saw. They went back to the sheriff's office and told the sheriff himself that Jake wasn't there. What do you mean he's not there? He's late, said the sheriff. The officers replied saying, We searched the home, the backyard, and the surrounding area, but nothing. So they came up with an idea to put out a search party to all other counties and regions to see if they find Jake, as well as his dog, too. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months. It's been 7 full months since Jake disappeared from everyone. They closed the search party roughly after 2 months, thinking that he just got on a boat and just left, or he was just plain out missing. But that was the
Least
of their worries. That night, at 3:01 a.m., a Rhodes officer was outside standing guard, or standing watch, as he would usually do. But then something happened. A man approached him, asking him, where is the nearest bar? The officer said, Bar is closed, man. You have to come back tomorrow. The man grabbed the officer by the throat and said to him,
I don't take no for an answer, so I'm going to ask you one more time.
Just as he was going to talk, a dark shadow came around the corner of the sheriff's office. The man tried to talk, but he couldn't. It was because a large machete was pierced through his chest, like all the way through. The man fell to the ground, gargling blood, then slowly died right in front of the officer. He drew his gun at the shadow-like person and said, Come on out, right now. He came out, but only to be someone the officer recognized. It was Jake, but he looked different. Very different last time anyone had seen him. Black and red bounty hunting outfit. Rips and tears in the outfit, and arms and legs. dark gray machete, still with blood on it, skeleton-like gloves, mask made of what looked like to be bone from animals with weird and mysterious writing on it. He also had a horrifying different voice. He had a new horse as well, all black and skeleton-like, mask on, deep grunts from the horse as well.
You're welcome,
said Jake. He goes into the sheriff's office and talks to the officer. Jake and the officer have a very heated conversation, but it ends up with Jake pinning the officer to the wall and requests something.
So here's what's gonna happen. You and the sheriff are going to help me find these 7 men and their whole fucking gang. I want you to know where they are as fast as possible. Just know this one thing. Daytime, I'm nice to some, but still psychotic. When nightfall hits, I'm more dangerous than anyone in this county. Believe it or not, it's true.
So, the journey starts with Jake getting as much advice as he can to find out where Eddie and his men went, or where they are being held at. A few days later, he finds 2 of their whereabouts. The first one the sheriff found was a man named Sean, who was one of the 7 men at his house that day. He was the one who took Jake's dog right in front of him. He found Sean at a campsite near tall trees. Jake was stalking Sean from a hilltop with his horse, Reaper. He got off the horse and approached Sean. You can guess what happened next, right? He went up to Sean and said 3 words.
Karma's a bitch, friend.
He shoots Sean in the leg, making him fall to the ground. Jake then realized that this camp wasn't his. Sean raided the camp. There was 5 dead bodies on the other side of the tent, so you wouldn't see them. Jake gagged Sean and took him back to his new home, which was all the way up in the snowy mountains in a cave that he carved out himself. Jake laid Sean down on the cold snow right before he got in his home. He said it simply to him.
I'm gonna show you what pain really looks like and feels like for what you did to my mother. You will suffer more than you ever have.
Jake then starts by kicking Sean in the head, making him cough up blood, and how hard Jake was kicking him, asking him,
Where is my dog at?
Jake said. Sean didn't reply back. Jake then took his machete and cut into Sean's leg, again asking him the same question. Nothing but screams. Lastly, Jake took his machete and cut Sean's leg completely off his body. And as he was cutting, Sean said he would tell him.
He's at the camp south of here, near La Grasse. You'll never get there though. It's too guarded.
While laughing, Jake, with no hesitation, with one swing of his machete, cut the head off of Sean like nothing. Jake then threw his head at his wall in his home straight ahead and threw a knife at it, sticking it to the wall permanently.
1 down, 6 to go. I will find you, Jack. If I gotta go through hell and back, then fuck it, I'll do it.
The next day, Jake grabs the piece of paper that has the location of the 2 men or victims that the law have found so far. Jake even told the law himself.
I do apologize for not bringing these guys in alive. I wish I could, but I'd rather not. You don't have to pay me. Say good job. No. I just want my fucking mother to be avenged for what these shit-eating pricks did to her and my dog, who's still out there. I hope.
The law didn't care what he did to them. As long as he had proof of their death, the bounty or investigation for that bounty would be closed. So Jake waits and finds the next guy sooner or later. Cecil Tucker. Cecil was working for Eddie ever since he got freed out of jail by Eddie's men back a few months ago. When Cecil was free, he went to the Lemoyne Raiders for help. They helped him, but only for a fee for protecting him. He offered anything he finds from strangers to the Raiders. Rumor has it that Cecil was wanted for killing good folks in their sleep. He was a coward. Later on, after the Raiders and Eddie's men met, they tried working together, but Eddie had faith that the Raiders would protect Cecil from anyone.
False.
Cecil was the main guy to find valuables from people when he would break into houses. He would give that money and valuables to the Raiders, who would give 25% to Eddie's men. They would use that money on guns and supplies. But that would come to a screeching halt, literally, as Jake found exactly where he was. The Raiders were in for one hell of a night. Especially Cecil. Jake took Cecil over to the water off the coast. He then began drowning Cecil over and over and over and over again until Cecil was begging for mercy. Then Jake took out his shotgun, and all you heard was a scream and then a loud-ass gunshot. Jake then cuts the head off of Cecil and brings it home to put on his wall.
2 down. 5 to go.
A few days went by. Jake found the next guy by himself. Yukon Nick, a trapper. Eddie mainly has Nick get him animal pelts for his men to survive the cold weather and bad weather, as well as selling them too. Yukon was indeed wanted for killing innocent people traveling, as well as brutally murdering other nearby traders who tried to sell near Nick. They had to be ready for a damn bloody fight. But it was the complete opposite when Jake found him camped out at an old fort. Possibly, it's a little blurry, but he found Nick. He was torturing a lawman who was most likely sent up there to confront Nick. Yeah, that didn't go well, now did it? Jake then found where Nick was at. But Jake realized Nick needed to be taken in alive for law enforcement reasons. So, Jake did just that. But there's a horrifying catch to it. The fight ends with Jake taking Nick to the sheriff's office in Strawberry. Jake had no mercy for Nick, but he made a deal with the sheriff there. Nick was due for a hanging the next day, so Jake came back the next day and watched Nick hang. But not in the way you think he would. He continued to get closer and closer to Nick, as they were talking about what crimes he did and what punishments he awaits. Then the rope fell. Nick was barely able to breathe, but Nick began to get weaker and weaker as Jake got closer to him. He eventually got so close, he was right up in Nick's face, staring at him, saying,
I want you to look into my eyes as you die. Feel my fucking pain.
Nick was pronounced dead. But that wasn't all. When everybody left the hanging, Jake cut off the head of Nick with the rope still on it. He took it home, and from there went out to find 4 more, including his dog. A week passes by, and no luck from either the law or Jake. But someone found Jake and told him they spotted something strange near tall trees. He then went over to tall trees and went hunting for basically people. He then saw a man in the distance wearing some type of animal head on his head. He then realized it was one of them. He went up to closely watch the camp and see if he would hear anyone talking, and just then, he did. The thought echoed through his damn head every time he heard it.
Hey, Fat, when you going up to get that dog from the swamp?
I don't know. When I have fucking time, how about that? That dog's probably dead anyway.
Hey, boss, you want us to go down there and get him? I mean, us 6 we can manage.
Did I fucking ask for you to go down there? The only person that trusts me down there is Philip, and I don't need you dumbasses to go down there. Because if all 6 of you go down there, we go scrap. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm winning that fight. We are going to wait on my call.
Fang was the name. Jake then went back to his horse and got all the necessities he needed. Fang did not see this one coming at all. As Jake went back to see the camp from afar, he didn't see Fang, like at all. He looked all over the camp, but nothing. But his men. So he did what he only knew how to do. Kill his men, lure his ass in. all the men were dead, Jake then saw Fang coming in. He lassoed Fang off his horse and began hitting him over and over and over, shoving him all over the place, until Fang was unconscious. He then put his head in water and splashed him once to wake him up. Then they began to have an all-out fight. Jake won. And after Fang awoke, Fang was begging him to kill him. He didn't care if he died or not. Jake didn't listen. He dragged Fang over near the camp, but more into the forest. He tied him up and said,
I won't be the one killing you. They will. And I'm gonna watch.
Jake then took some predator bait out of his back pocket and spread it all over Fang. All he heard as he walked away was the sounds of screaming and an alpha male wolf mauling Fang. Jake watched from a distance and could only see struggle and blood. When the wolf was done and ran, Jake then went in to collect his trophy, he calls it. He grabbed the body, threw it over a cliff, and lit it on fire. When it was all and done with, Jake cut the head off of Fang and returned to his home, ending the threat. The next day, Jake got his information from Fang because Fang was talking about somebody who only trusts Fang in the swamp. A name he heard of before. Philip Collier. He once was a head man for the mayor of Saint Denis, but that ended quickly when Philip killed him trying to sneak out some papers that Philip didn't want anyone to see. He then ran off into the swamp and hid there for God knows how long. Days, weeks, months, who knows. The night folk found him and wanted to help him, so they did, until Eddie's men found him and asked him for a job. Philip said, "Oh yes, please." So they made Philip lure strangers into the mouth of a gator, basically, and into traps, also by the night folk, that were basically sometimes hiding in a tree or behind one. The gator was on some type of drugs because it would follow Philip's orders like a dog. He would steal any money that they had on them and give it to Eddie's men, and to keep for himself to get more different kinds of plants for his toxins or drugs. Probably cocaine or crystal meth he was making. But Jake found Philip a few days later near an old house in the middle of the swamp. He wanted to savor this one. He went up to Philip and knocked him out. Philip then awoke to pain all over his body. No. Not fire. Jake was dragging Philip by a rope while on his horse going at a fast rate. 15 minutes of that. Jake let go of the rope and went up to Philip. His face was mangled, one arm gone, leg dismembered. Jake then cut the head off of Philip and threw his body in the swamp for the gators, the non-drugged gators, to eat. Jake was just about to go home when he spotted another camp, heavily guarded, and from the distance, he saw his dog tied to a pole With no hesitation, Jake ran in the camp, killing all of the men, one by one, then leaving one guy alive. He freed his dog and said,
Oh my god. I missed you, Jake. I'm gonna get you home.
But before he left, his dog saw the guy that Jake tied up. Jake watched and saw his dog mauling the Skinner. And while he did that, he laughed psychotically. That night, Jake went home with Jack and treated his wounds as well as giving him real food and a good place to sleep. Jeanbo Finley was the last main guy for Jake to go after. Jake knew this from chatter and roads from multiple strangers. He heard it all everywhere, especially from Rhodes, because Gene was very famous in Rhodes for robbing the general store at certain times of day, as well as the saloon for the alcohol. Gene was a business type of guy who would literally rob a bank, and then as he would walk out, he would have a photographer take a picture of him for the newspaper. Gene would give a good percent of the money to Eddie. Then the rest would go to him and his men. Gene's men were some of the best gunslingers and sharpshooters in the West. But Jake quickly found where Gene was. Gene didn't know what was going to happen that night. As Jake came down the trail to where Gene was, Gene was at that old mansion called, I think it's Shady Bell, yeah. This fight was probably the most bloody out of all of them. Jake did not hold back anything.
Get out! Quit messing up my soup!
Jake tied Gene up and put him on top of a bunch of explosives that he owned. Jake then killed all his backup men that tried to save Gene from near catastrophe. As Jake was killing Gene's men, he managed to escape and run off. Jake ran right after him, stopping him in his tracks. Jake then takes Gene back over to the ticking time bomb of explosives and adds more dynamite to the mix, as well as moonshine. He tells Gene one more thing.
I'm gonna go kill your boss now, Gene. Have a nice time. Fucking hell!
Jake ignites the explosives, killing Gene and almost blowing up the mansion. He cuts the head off of Gene and lets his burnt, rotting body lay there for the law to deal with. He writes it in his journal.
6 dead. I'm burning in hell. Except for Eddie. I will find you and make your death the worst pain you have ever suffered. If I die, Mother, just know I gave it my very fucking all.
Another week goes by, and Eddie was nowhere. Jake searched everywhere for him, asking different officers and sheriffs, as well as asking the postman if they'd seen anything, but nothing. Until one day, Jake received a note by the Rhodes Sheriff Office, saying,
You killed all my men. Why don't you meet me near the watchtower on that cliff? You know the one where you once took in a shepherd myth. Meet me there, and we can see if you really do know the meaning of death.
Jake accepted. He took the road all the way up the mountain to find Eddie. He left his horse at the end point so he can leave without having to go so far. Then, the inevitable. Jake and Eddie. They don't talk or say anything. The fight starts in minutes. Jake was ready, and so was Eddie. But Jake said one final prayer before facing Eddie. He prayed that his mother would be happy even if he died here. He has killed all the men that were there that day.
God protect me from the evil.
The fight broke out. It ends. Eddie threw Jake off of the high cliff. Eddie was hurt like hell, but he left the area in pain. And before he left, he took one last look at Jake's body down at the bottom of the cliff.